Okay, music is an art. There's no real right or wrong way of doing something. There's ways that work and are pleasing objectively to people, but they're not necessarily the only way to do something. So I say that music theory, you can look at it like basically someone has done something that worked and they wrote it in a book, and it's like a bag of tricks. So you can learn the entire music theory thing and know what could potentially work in a certain situation. As composers, we're creatives, right? There's no such thing in humanity as original thought. Everything you can think of will be based on something else that you've already heard of, seen, touched, anything like this. Everything has to be based on something else. So the more you expose yourself to things as a creative, the more things your subconscious will pull from when you're writing. So if you've been through a book of music theory and you know all the things that will objectively work to most people, which is what a book of music theory is. You know that, a nice D minor to a B flat major will sound pretty. When you're composing, you will draw from that. You will draw from your music theory. I do every day. But at the same time, it's not the end all be all. I can learn, in my opinion, as much by listening to a Spotify playlist of classical music or of Lady Gaga songs, the top 40. I can learn things subconsciously from each of these things, which will be put into my compositions as
Absolutely.
a creative, because I have a larger pool of information to pull from. And like I say, there's no such thing as an original thought. So the more things, the bigger your pool of information to pull from when you compose, the better composer you'll be. So music theory, yes, it's absolutely valuable to learn because it's improving your pool specifically to the composition of music. And, but at the same time, like a lot of people ask, do you need music theory? No, you do not. You don't need it, but it will help you because it makes the pool of things you draw from greater.
What we're all about as composers is, like you said, we're learning how to develop our own palette, right? We're looking, whether it's a painter who's going to have, tons of different colors that they can choose from, or whether it's an architect who has many different tools that he can use to create different things. We have different things that we use to develop the music that we, and one time you said this, and I still agree with it. You said, even if you're just listening to a country song, right? And you hear a snare drum sound that you like, you can take that and you can bring that into your own music, and you can take things from everything.
I steal mercilessly from all over the place. But I'm just going to interrupt you one more time.
Sure.
You said about the music theory and John Williams, like the reading the music theory book and not being able to write like John Williams. The reason John Williams sounds like John Williams is because his pool of influence, the things that he draws from. I mean, let's put aside the fact that he is I always pronounce this wrong, but he's virtuoso pianist. He can play very, very well piano. Sorry, to put it in a really dumb way. He can play the piano very well, right? So his brain works very musically. It works very intricately when it comes to music. Okay. But the pool of influence that John Williams draws from is very specific. It's very classical. Like if you listen to a lot of the techniques, a lot of the, tones and textures he creates, you can almost one for one see where he got most of them from. And that's what I'm saying. That music has kind of, it's not moved beyond John Williams, but the pool of influence is greater these days. So you're getting things that John Williams could never dream of, You get some of these people, like Hard said, like some of the best idea comes from a kid in the Bronx, which I thought was a funny little statement, but it's kind of true. It's because they have a pool of influence that John Williams will just never have. His taste is completely different to what, all the people sitting, except maybe you, Ashton, in your classical Baroque lessons.
No.
Like the rest of us here,
No. Okay.
Our pool of influence is very modern. Our pool of influence, goes through sound design, it goes through synth, it goes through dubstep, it goes through drum and bass. If we were classic, if all our influence was, like literally the entirety of our influence pool came from classical music, you would have a lot more people that sounded like John Williams. It's just we have more tones and textures to play with.
Yeah, I want to say there's a ton of lenses that you can pull this stuff through. Like theory is definitely a very popular lens for dissecting certain aspects of music, definitely. But then there's stuff like sound design too. Like you mentioned the snare drum example, like just listening to the sound of things and how you mix something is a lens for pulling new ideas as well. And you can not know theory, you can say oh, I didn't learn theory, I just play music, but you still play stuff that's basic rock progressions. But you got that through the lens of just listening to music and fiddling around on a guitar. Some people do it through the note graph in a DAW, and that's their lens for figuring
just on
these
that-
things out.
Just on that,
Yeah.
something to point out, like you said, some people just noodle on guitar, and they come up with a great idea. Like one thing I'd like to point out is whenever that person noodling on guitar goes, "Oh, that was good," that's because their subconscious is telling them something
Yeah,
they've
definitely.
listened to before. This they had an emotional response to that specific thing. Like there's something about what they did on the guitar that they've heard before, and it evoked an emotional response, almost like a nostalgia in them, which made it work. That's what I'm saying. So the more of those moments you have in your life, the more music you listen to, and something evokes an emotional response, the better you'll become as a composer, because you'll have more situations to draw from when you're composing. So whenever you're composing and you go, "Oh, that's that feels right," that's because emotionally you've reacted to that, and that's why each composer sounds different.
Whether it's a piano and throwing it off a bridge and recording the sound of it and using it in a score, or whether it's, plucking a piano string in a very odd way to be able to get one specific sound, whether it's synthesizers, modular synthesizers or software synthesizers, whether it's, asking a tuba player like Hans Zimmer normally does to play it in a way that they've never played before, or whether it's some specific technique that's been used previously that, is very helpful to our compositional approach to whatever it is that we're doing. I think it's very important that we have a large canvas and a large palette to be able to paint that canvas, right? And having music theory ideas and techniques and having a toolkit of things that have worked previously to be able to use to be creative is not a bad thing.
I feel like the thing with music theory is, because I took a class last year and I was like, oh, I'm going to learn all these things about how to influence my music better. And I feel like now I don't use them as much, just because I feel like I get so wrapped up in, okay, I need to avoid this parallel movement. Okay, I need to have these chords sound good together. And it's just, you focus so much on that you kind of lose.
I'll tell you what, Bailey, like
trying
fuck
something
parallel
new.
movement.
We got to the same place last week with Tom, didn't we?
It was just an example.
Bailey, you've stored up the hornet's nest now. Stirred up.
Remember this, folks. Remember this, Daniel. Every single time you put a parallel fifth in your music, Bach kills a kitten.
Well,
Hey, I wasn't saying I do that. It was just an example.
music theory is fluid. It's just a bag of ideas. If you do a parallel fifth and it sounds okay, if it works in the context of what you're trying to do, then it is correct.
I mean, it totally all depends on what you're trying to do. I mean, for example, the whole symphony thing that I did was an experiment, because really what it was about, I mean, it was 30 minutes of music, but what I was trying to do is I was trying to write in one specific style, right? So in that case, if I were to have broken one rule, or if I were to have sort of gone outside of the boundaries, now I'm like writing 200 years in the future, and that's something that nobody never would have done. So what I did is I just sort of focused in on that period, and but when it comes to modern film composition, where we're always trying to innovate and we're always trying to do what's best for the story, and we're using all these new innovations, whether it's synthesis or, I think that's fundamentally okay. As composers, we are trying to use all of the different resources that we have to be able to create what it is that we want to create. And we can use different techniques, whether they are rule-based or whether they are not, to be able to do that. So we can use, I have, synthesizers over here, but I also have music theory books over there. It's my choice to decide whether or not I want to rely on that, or whether or not I want to rely on this, which 300 years ago, which would have been hell of rebellious, right? So as composers, what we're really all about is determining what resources it is that we want to use and why we want to use those resources, right? If I was ever going to want to write a score that was generally in the style of John Williams, there's no way in hell that I could do that without have studying music theory and without have gone very in depth in music theory, right? So all that I'm saying is that for anybody out there, a lot of the times people will use similar arguments like music theory, it's just rules, blah, 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 blah. They will use that to not learn it at all, which can actually do more harm than it would do good, right? It might not make us better composers, right? But what it will definitely do is it'll open up and broaden our horizons to be able to allow us to write a large canvas of music, right? Daniel, if you wanted to write something that was very Irishy sounding, automatically I know in my head, okay, I can use, the second mode to be able to do that because it has that specific interval, right? if I wanted to do something incredibly different, I can base my composition and use the triads that are presented in the Locrian mode to be able to do that, because it's so incredibly dissonant. It's going to make, people on the edge of their seat the whole entire composition, right? There's certain attributes that actually work and that we can rely on. But then again, there are so many different things that are outside of the realm of rules that, I mean, even, I do, and that, you as an incredible sound designer very, very, commonly do. But it's all about innovation, and it's all about discovering what's going to be best for the story. And just like Hans Zimmer said in this thing, it's about sticking to the story. And if we stick to the story, that's what it's all about.
That's pretty much it. That's all it comes down to. It's rules, music theory, anything like this. They're all essentially irrelevant. They're all the exact same thing. They are just a pool from which to draw inspiration. And then, the bigger the field, the bigger the inspiration pool, the better you will be as a composer. The more confident you are in your influence, the more confident you are to understand what you, regardless of what other people say, what you like and dislike, that will define who you are as a composer. So people who say, oh, I don't need music theory will stunt my growth, they're what we call in the industry fucking morons. Okay, like there's no way you can physically learn something. I mean, okay, maybe you can, I take that back. There's no way really you can learn something and it make you dumber. Like education is the way forward, whether it be like an education doesn't have to be sitting in a school. Education doesn't have to be listening to someone like me ramble on for days on end. Education can be listening to the entire works of Beethoven. That's an education. And, the education is filling your mind with things it can draw from. That's all it is. There's no such thing as rules. There's no such, like, how many times have you walked down the street and your feet have been shuffling to like a rhythm, like that can be a basis from which you can draw your next cue from. Like, you'll be walking along and you hear like this crashing metal sound and you're like, that was terrifying. And the next time you write a horror score, all of a sudden this crashing metal sound rears its ugly head. That's something that you're drawing from. So music is a creative endeavor, if I can be a little bit pretentious. Music's a creative endeavor, and it's all about drawing from the subconscious. So just expose yourself to what you can. Fuck anybody who tells you it's wrong. Fuck anybody who tells you there's rules or ways or parallel fifths will kill kittens. Anybody who says that, just ignore it.
But this is why I like to have these types of conversations with different composers. This is why I like to sit down and have these types of discussions. It's because there's always going to be these very specific things that we're always going to sort of disagree with, because there's so many different stylistic approaches to this thing, right? It's the same thing as writing, like writing a book. There's specific ideas that can help one write a book, but everyone's going to do it differently. Everyone's going to take the specific rules and they're going to be able to meld them into their own style and be able to, use them differently. But, people aren't really going to be able to read a book very well if there's no periods or commas or apostrophes or capitalizations, right?
Well, I'll concede to you a little bit. Like, there is obviously, like, when I say there's no rules, right? I mean that from a purely creative standpoint. Obviously, if the music isn't just for you, then there are things you have to understand. Like, I could go off and write the most aleatoric piece of nonsensical crap you've ever heard, right? And musically, it's just as sound as anything else if I'm drawing correctly, and to me it makes sense. If I'm trying to present that in a romantic comedy, it's not gonna work. There's certain things, there's certain I don't want to use the word rules, but there's certain ways you have to approach music.
Cultural expectations, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. You have to abide by expectations of the people listening to it. And the other thing is if you're writing for film, where it's not our music, we're writing music to order. We're making a pizza for someone. We're baking a cake. That's what we're doing. Someone says, "I want this," and you provide that. We have that ability as composers. That still doesn't mean. That still means like the bigger your influence pool, the better you will be at it. So like, for example, when I was working on, like I did the Monster High films, like that was very kind of John Powley, Harry Gregson Williams-ish, like, what's the word? Like, not majestic, but, whimsical kind of thing.
You mean sort of like,
I wasn't,
like the orchestration
I wasn't
style?
for that kind of, Yeah, exactly. I wasn't
Yeah.
known for that kind of music prior to that. So what did I do? I went and I just binged on all the whimsical type of music I could. And when it came to writing that score, I had so much so much influence to draw from, so many different techniques, so many different ideas that I could pull from. That's all that matters. So yes, I concede to you that to the point that you can't just go off and write whatever the fuck you want. And
I really like.
oh, go on.
I really like the example about cooking because that got me thinking. Like, you can be taught how to cook and like make a cake, but not know like any of the molecular scientific reasons why putting these ingredients together and these emulsifiers and all these things make it work. Someone taught it to you, and through your own lens, you have your own way of dissecting and thinking about making a cake. And I feel like it can be the same with music, whether it's like a note scroll and a DAW, or it's like purely just like pathways that have been built into your brain by the things you've listened to.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You just got to draw from everything. And yeah, so like I say, like to a certain degree, there are no rules. But if you're doing music for someone else, then of course, they get to impose the rules upon you, in which case then there are rules. Music intrinsically doesn't have rules, though. That's what I was trying to say. Music theory can teach you how to write a certain way. It can teach you a hell of a lot. By the way, I think the most important thing in music theory for anybody listening to understand is just how to construct a chord on a keyboard. Like, if you understand like how to make a minor, major, a seven, diminished seven, anything like this, if you understand how to do that, you'll find that a lot of music becomes easier. And pivot notes. That's how I learned to compose. Yeah. I would just do a D minor. I'd go, well, what's another chord that has a D in it? And I could go there, and I know it would work. It may be a bit weird, but I knew it would work. So yeah, music theory is definitely worth having, but in terms of practical skills, learn how to form a chord. Learn how to form a proper triad, and you'll find that like the ease of writing, that was like a turning point for me. That was the one practical skill I learned and went from I don't know what the fuck I'm doing to I kind of know what to do now. As soon as you know how to construct a triad.
I took piano lessons for years when I was younger, but I had a teacher that really encouraged me to improvise and noticed that I didn't like learning theory. And a lot of the times we'd kind of abstract ideas, and she'd be like, okay, this thing we just learned, if you play it like that, that's why it sounds like that. And then I kind of, when I was younger, I forgot the theory, and I'm like, oh, I like how that sounds, yay. And I learned kind of based on that for a long time. But theory, like, can be this great dissection of why those things work.
Yeah, and honestly,
I've been really enjoying learning theory recently because I'm able to explore different ideas and like get to these places like, why does this type of music sound like this? How can I dissect this in a theory sense? Get to that place, establish that rule for myself, and then leap off into that creative area, ignoring the theory from that point onward.
Yeah. And honestly, when studying in a classical way was not my parents' decision, it wasn't anybody else's decision than mine. I mean, I was literally 13 years old, and I had looked up and I had really researched what path I wanted to take. At that age, I admired people like you, Daniel. I admired people like Hans, and I'd seen all these interviews, and I definitely wanted to go down the electronics route of doing all the synthesis and everything like that. But I constantly had something telling me, no, you should probably just start out with the root of music in general and just sort of get all that stuff out of the way. So that's where I did. And 100%, all of that stuff helped me with what I do now in film music. Like, it helped me with voice leading. It helped me with understanding the foundation and the origin of music, which then helped me understand the sort of DNA and what it's built out of. And I think that helps me on a true level. But I know not everyone, that's not the approach for everyone. And everyone's approach is so incredibly different, and everyone's style is so incredibly different. And I think that it all really depends on who you are. But I think that it definitely does not hurt to know this stuff. But yeah.
You're the host, Ashton. Keep it up, Ashton.